Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am delighted to tell you what you just heard from Professor Gregory Hand. That was a piece called Allegro from the 6th Organ Symphony by Charles Marie Widor. Charles Marie Widor, Allegro. So what a joyous occasion for us to be able to start this conversation this afternoon in the beautiful recital hall and on our magnificent Kleist organ. Thank you, and thanks for sharing some time with us. Okay, how fortunate are we to have these amazing former university presidents and current university president with us this afternoon, to be able to welcome them home for homecoming and to be able to hear a little bit about their thinking these days. And it is a joy to be able to talk with them, and I want to also acknowledge some other folks who are here with us. Sandy Boyd is not with us this afternoon. He said that while he loves that everyone is back, he didn't have to do this. And we said, you're right. You are absolutely right. But we're delighted that Susan is here with her family. So Susan is here with, Betsy Boyd and Bill Nusser, Bill and Diane Boyd, and Tom and Liz Boyd. So please join me in welcoming them. And I think many of you know that this all was occasioned by the painting of 3 new portraits of our presidents, President Coleman, Skorton, and Mason, and those were unveiled yesterday in the University of Iowa Library's Presidential Gallery. They are here in the Pearl West lobby, so if you haven't yet seen them, I encourage you to do that after the conversation. And there's a beautiful little booklet that is out there as well that features all of the portraits and a little bit of information about the presidents, and that's also online at the UI Library's website. So take a look at that if you would like to learn more about those portraits as well as the presidents. So I'm going to start off with just a couple of other introductions. Let me see, I've got that here somewhere. All right. In addition to our presidents and the Boyd family, we're delighted today to also have some members of the Regents with us. President of the Board of Regents, Mike Richards, is here, as well as President Pro Tem Patty County, Regent David Barker, and Regent Zach Least. Thank you to you for your service and for joining us today. Now, I'm going to give you a completely insufficient but brief reminder of the tenure of our guests today. So, Hunter Rawlings served as the 17th president of the University of Iowa from 1987 until 1995, and after his service to Iowa, he became president of Cornell University as the 10th president and served there until 2003, with 2 additional terms as interim president. That sounds a lot like Sandy. He held the rank of professor of classics. He also served as president of the American Association of Universities from 2011 to 16, and we're delighted that his wife Elizabeth is here with us today as well. Mary Sue Coleman came after Dr. Rawlings as the 18th president from 95 until 2002, and she was then named president of the University of Michigan. She held the rank of Professor of Biochemistry and is now President and Professor Emerita, both, from Michigan, and is serving as President of the Association of American Universities, also something in common with Hunter. And President Coleman has a distinguished history of involvement with the AAU and has served as its chair previously in 2011 to 12. And we're delighted that Kenneth Coleman is here with us today as well. David Skorton began his career here in 1980, so he grew up here. He became an instructor at the University of Iowa. In 1981, he was named an assistant professor, moved up the professorial ranks as professor in the Department of Internal Medicine and Electrical and Computer Engineering. He served as vice president for research and then vice president as well for external relations. He was our 19th president from 2003 until 2006. and then following the pattern of these very amazing people, became president of Cornell University, again, following Hunter. And he was the 12th president of Cornell University, and the second to arrive directly from the University of Iowa. After Cornell, Dr. Skorton joined the Smithsonian Institution as secretary in 2015 and served in that role until just last summer when he became CEO of the Association of American Medical Colleges. Sally Mason came to the university as its 20th president in 2007, served until 2015 when she was named President Emerita, and she held the rank of Professor of Cellular and Molecular Biology. Upon leaving the university, she joined the Association of Governing Boards and provides consultative services for institutions of higher education across the country. And we're delighted that Ken Mason is here with us today. And President Bruce Harreld became our 21st president in 2015. He served on the faculty of the Harvard Business School before that, from 2008 to 2014. And he has also been a faculty member at Northwestern University and the Kellogg School of Management. And before that, he served in several corporate leadership positions at Kraft General Foods, Boston Market Company, and IBM. So we're pleased that Mary Harreld is with us here today. Would please Mary, Kenneth, Ken, and Elizabeth please stand and allow us to welcome you home to the University of Iowa and Iowa City. Okay, so for some questions now. Let's start with Hunter. Hunter, you have had the longest arc of time since you served here at the University of Iowa.
You just mean I'm the oldest.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but maybe you can declare that. Tell us how you think higher education is better than when you served here.
I think it's hard to say that it's this much better than it was when I was at Iowa, but I think it is clear that the world now knows how strong American higher education is. And it's a remarkable story because it's not an old story. No one would have said that back in the 1930s or 40s or even 50s, but starting soon after that, American universities, particularly research universities like the University of Iowa, became clearly the best in the world as a group. There are many reasons for that. Part of the reason, interestingly, is that we don't have a nationwide system of higher education the way the French do, the Germans do, the Japanese do, and virtually everyone else in the world. Instead, we have this mad mishmash of public universities, private universities, religious universities, secular, small colleges, et cetera, et cetera. And we're very fortunate, and I think the French and the Germans wish they had what we have. But historically, they developed differently. So part of our advantage is we compete with each other. I mean, you know how much you compete at Iowa for faculty, for grants, for everything. And that's just not true in much of the rest of the world. Secondly, we have very open access to knowledge in this country. We don't close off the internet. In many countries, that's just not the case. So we have a big advantage in terms of openness, and the world knows that. So the world now comes to these universities as students, as professors, and that's why I think we have such talent. We're a magnet for talent. So I could go on this, but I won't. And I just think that, yes, we just continue to get stronger.
Thank you. So, Sally and Bruce especially, each of you have heard me say several times when we do outreach events across the state or around the country that I believe, and I know you do too, in the transformative power of public higher education. What do you think the components are of public higher education that promote that transformation? What is it that we do that helps transform people's lives? And we'll start with you, Sally.
Well, I'd play off Hunter a little bit. Certainly access. The fact that this country, more than any other country, has higher education of all shapes, sizes, and flavors available to its populace, means that there's more access than ever before. And I think having that kind of access can make it truly transformative for people who never thought that they'd ever have that opportunity. I come from a family that never thought they could ever get that opportunity, and I was a first-generation college student. And it was truly, as you've heard me tell many times, Lynette, truly transformative in my own life. And I've seen it played out time and time again. And the fact that at most of our public universities today, including this one, still 40 to 50% of our students are first-generation college students tells me that that transformation and that transformative process is still alive and well and part of the American dream.
Bruce, I know this is a really important part of your presidency here and your own commitment. What do you think those elements are?
Well, certainly I think Sally's right. Access is a critical component. We put a big emphasis on even doubling, if you will, our first generation matriculation. But I also think it's the support systems that we put into these universities, which the mentoring, the tutoring, and we're trying to do even more of that. And I think another critical component of this has really been, quite frankly, the state supports across the United States. And there's been if you go back 10 years ago, I'm sure we'll talk about today in a second, but historically there's been a fairly substantial state support of their public flagship institutions, upwards of perhaps 60 to 70% of the total cost to educate a student, not the research component, but just the educational side. And so you have this double whammy almost of if it's a more of a right than a privilege, so it's open, and then secondly, the support system's in place, and then thirdly, the money has flowed with that, and I think it created a massive positive impact on our society. Frankly, one of the reasons I took this job is because I'm a product, as many of us are, of that, and wouldn't be here today, and I see it changing. We'll get to that. And I think that's one of the big issues we need to deal with is it really helped our society in the past? I think clearly yes. What happens if it disappeared? And I think that would be a real issue, but I'm more interested in what my colleagues say, but I suspect it's something similar.
Good, thank you. Mary Sue, you've had a remarkable career, as everyone has. I'm interested in looking back on your time here at the University of Iowa, how you believe that time impacted the fuller trajectory of your career after Iowa.
Well, I certainly remember when I was selected to be the president of the University of Iowa. It came as quite a surprise, actually, because I was provost at New Mexico, and somebody had nominated me for the position at Iowa. And later we learned, in fact, Ken's sister, who lives in Cedar Rapids, said that she had nominated me. She wasn't quite sure what I did at New Mexico, so she called up our son Jonathan and said, well, you know, what is it Mary Sue actually does, so that she could write this. And I thought that was so sweet. I just could not believe that Gloria thought I would be a good fit for Iowa. And I was so surprised when I was selected. I remember the interview in Des Moines, and Marvin Pomerantz told me to wait, don't go, wait in the hotel room. And I waited for about an hour, and he came and knocked on the door and said, we're going to offer you the job. And I was just astounded and excited. It was amazing. I actually negotiated nothing. I took whatever they offered me. I didn't know you're supposed to negotiate for this position. But for me...
Maybe that's what you learned.
Well, I did learn that later. But believe me, when I went to Michigan, it was a little bit different. But I did learn. But you know, there were so many things that happened in my time at Iowa. First of all, I want to give a credit to Wayne Ritchie. Because Wayne was the head of the Regent's office. I learned so much from him. He was a tremendous mentor. And once he said to me something that I will never forget. He said, governance is not by adoration. And he was right. The governing board and the people who are responsible for the institution to the public have a huge job. And I learned so much from them and from my individual relationships with them. The other thing I wanted to say that I was able to articulate at Iowa. I knew it before, but I hadn't articulated it. And that was that knowledge is always contingent on the evidence that's in front of you. And you always have to be willing to be open to changing what you think you know by the new evidence that is developed. And when people say to me, what is it that the most important thing that a student learns at a place like the University of Iowa? And I said that knowledge is contingent based on the evidence that you have in front of you. And so for me, it was a wonderful transformative experience to be here, and I'm always grateful.
That's fascinating. David, how about you? How did Iowa change you? And you've had the longest tenure at the University of Iowa.
Lynette, why did you pick me last? Did I ever do anything to upset you? I have a lot of respect for these people,
So
but
they
they've
could
been
speak.
they've been going on and on about this and that, and I'm just sitting here wondering, what did I do to Lynette to make her not call me? Well, as you said earlier, Lynette, when you were introducing us, I really did grow up here. I came here with the lowest tenure track rank they had. They don't even have it anymore, actually. I think once I moved up, they got rid of it. It was too embarrassing. And I learned all about higher education by being here at the University of Iowa. Everything I learned about the importance of the faculty, about the importance, as Mary Sue said, of the governance, and of the importance of the staff. We talk a lot about faculty and students. And of course, most of the employees of the university, of every university, are staff employees. Learned a lot of those things. I learned a lot about the importance of the humanities, to some extent the arts, at the University of Iowa. And I'm a doc, and I did research in engineering. And so I came from the STEM world and sort of knew implicitly that there was some importance to it in general in education. But I learned much more about it by being exposed to Frank Conroy, our late wonderful leader of the Iowa Writers Workshop, who was my mentor in music, sort of rode herd on me about music, I would say. We had a band that consisted of Dan Moore, who's still the head of the percussion program here, and John Rapson, till recently, who was in charge of the jazz program, and a couple of others. And Frank called the group Close Enough. That's what he called us. And he had a big influence on me. But mostly, I learned about myself by being at the University of Iowa, more than I learned about anything else. I had things that were great, things that weren't so great, and learned a lot. And I always think that the most important things I learned was a combination of the people in the university and the people in the community who really had nothing to do with the university, but were part of the milieu.
And for those of you who haven't yet seen the portraits, you will enjoy seeing that David has his flute in the portrait, as well as Frank Conroy's book, one of his books. So a lovely tribute to that friendship. Hunter, we know that there are lots of people who continue to call for higher education to adapt, and that's a good thing, and to change. But what are the things that we shouldn't change about our current model that you've experienced and reflect on?
That's a good question. We're in a funny period right now. I mean, funny meaning odd. These universities have never been more significant to the United States than they are now, in terms of everything. Impact on the economy, impact on the culture. Look at the mad rush to get into these universities. There's never been anything like the pressure of getting into these universities. So everyone wants to go. People from around the world will pay the full tuition to come to our universities. But our universities are pretty unpopular right now. So it's an odd condition in that we've never been stronger, we've never been better, as you were intimating earlier, but there's a lot of negative press about universities, having to do with many different things. Cost is probably number one. I don't think the public understands the high tuition cost, the sticker price of higher ed, and it's always a negative for us. There is the political correctness that to some extent plagues universities, and I think has made universities a target for people. There's scandals that go on. It's partly the General Motors effect. When you become really large and really prominent, everyone finds something wrong. I entered this profession as a professor of Greek and Latin. I swore a vow of poverty when I got my PhD. I was happy to swear the vow of poverty because I loved what I was doing. And I wound up at these huge institutions that have just massive influence. And it's, over my career, which has been very long, it's been a sea change from being really fairly small in impact to being huge in impact. So for all those reasons, we're at a funny period. And what in the world was your question in the first place? No, I do think that we have to sort this out. And it's not easy to sort out in the sense that we're good, but we're far from perfect. And now we take a lot of criticism. It would be great if a couple of others of our group would talk about this, because I think it's a profoundly difficult puzzle to solve.
Why don't you call on who you'd like?
Well, I'm certainly not calling on Skorton, that's for sure. So, Mary Sue, take it up.
Thanks, Hunter. Actually, we at AAU have been quite concerned about this issue of public perception, particularly of big research universities. And this Pew study came out, which is the one you were referring to, about the negative array of articles in the press about universities and our cost and our political correctness. So we have actually launched at AAU a fairly significant study about this, using our best social scientists at our universities, because we thought if you want to answer a question, you go to the social scientist and get them to help you construct the kind of survey that's going to give you the real feeling that people have. And what we've discovered in that work, and it's going on now, is that, and in fact, I want to have a shout out to the University of Iowa, because you have done one of the best jobs of looking at the data that you got back, and that you have refined your messages to give people a clearer idea about what you do at the university. And I am in awe of the way that it has been done here. So I wanted to say that about the university. But all of our universities in the AAU are looking at this question. And what we find is it's a nuanced opinion, and the public is not as negative about universities as the Pew study would say to you. But they are very concerned about cost, and they are very concerned about access. And that is why, you know, we need, first of all, to get the word out about the fact that we are affordable. We want students from rural areas particularly, whose families may feel like they shouldn't even allow their child to apply because they couldn't afford it. The sticker price really does turn some people off, but we have robust financial aid. We have so much more financial aid now than we did 30 years ago, that it is possible, and we can make it possible. But it's using our research power to learn and to do a better job. And I agree with you. We're trying, and I think we're making some headway. But it's really important, because in this country, having access to really good quality higher education is one of the best things we can do for the next generation.
Good, thank you very much. I want to take it from the large multi-university perspective and ask you about we all understand the value of these experiences and your commitment to the leadership at the institutions. And you have each already, Bruce and the rest of you in your careers, made remarkable differences here at the University of Iowa. Is there a particular incident that you can recall, perhaps a conversation with a student or a faculty member, that really helped change the way you were thinking about your presidency? And I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that one. Bruce, can we start with you?
Well, I think that all my colleagues are scrambling, thinking through their past. I think there's several things. When I joined the university, there were a lot of people not very pleased with that whole process. And to say the least. Yeah, really. Yeah, in case you didn't notice. But by the way, I need to say that they're, particularly Sally, but all the other members were calling me or reaching out and saying, it's a little hazing going on right now, but you're going to get through it just fine. So I just want to thank them all for just patting me on the back and boosting me up during that period. But that caused an important dialogue, I think, on our campus, which is where are we going? What's been happening over the last decade? Given this change in funding that's been going on for the last decade, what do we do about it? And I think those dialogues, at least for me, were very cathartic because I think we all came to the conclusion that we need to own the future rather than reacting to the past. And that then has now set us on a path of changing the way we talk about things so we can get our messaging out a little more cleanly. It's caused us to say, in most of our programs, what's the 21st century equivalent of it? So we're fantastic in writing, but maybe, and we should continue investing in that, but maybe we should think about screenwriting as the next extension of that. We have a long history in space physics. Maybe we should reinvest in that in certain key ways so that the NASA contract grant that we recently got, and I can keep going. In medicine, we've got all these, so I think it kind of, at least for me, and I think for a lot of us, woke us up and said, you know, we need to own this future. And then the final thing I say, I teach a class on leadership, and we spend a lot of time, we just met 2 days ago, and we keep coming back to this notion that if organizations, universities, colleges, governments, businesses stay where they are, they're ultimately not going to succeed. They're trapped in their past. And so there's this, winners tend to become losers unless they continually push and experiment out. And the students every day remind me of that. They did some interesting things in a couple of our courses. We would never have computer science within engineering if our students weren't taking some liberal arts computer science activities and circuit design and engineering, and they were doing both of those. And we started noticing that and said, well, let's make it easier for you. Let's put those programs together. So that's innovation in the academy.
Sally?
Look around at this building. I had a slightly different experience than my colleagues up here. When I came to the University of Iowa, I had grand plans for going through a very thorough strategic planning process and setting priorities. 9 months into my presidency, we had this thing called the flood of 2008. And then 3 months later, the economy collapsed. So it was a rather interesting first year as president, to say the least. But as we began, and we set priorities instantly after the flood. We knew exactly what we needed to do. And I was so reassured in such a short period of time by the people here. Last night I hearkened back to our friend and our dear colleague Sandy Boyd, who has always said it's about the people. And without question, it is about the people. I got to know the people of Iowa, and especially the people of this community, very quickly, because we had this disaster in front of us that we had to deal with. And I'm serious when I say, look at this building. This is an incredible, incredible testimony to the spirit of Iowa, Iowans, the University of Iowa, really all things Iowa. We knew that once we made the decision to build this building where we have it today, downtown Iowa City, that the face of this city would change forever. And there were possibilities, many possibilities, and it's fun to come back 4 years later and see many of those possibilities that we thought could happen really happening. So the face of this city is changing. It's changing quickly. The face of this university is changing. It's great to hear Bruce talk about the many academic things that he's had the opportunity to be part of, because it's fun to see that kind of growth and development. And it's really, really gratifying to myself and so many of us who went through the rather difficult years of the recession, the flood followed by the recession, to see that in fact our predictions, in fact my constantly saying over and over again, we'll come back, we'll be stronger, we'll be better, And we are stronger and we are better. And there's a great future ahead for this university.
So Sally, I followed that, and I just want to tell you, if it hadn't been for your faith, your courage, and your leadership, we might not have ever gotten through it. Thank you ever so much.
Say again what your question was, Lynette. You know, you ask a university president what time it is, and they start telling you about how you make watches and how springs work. And what was your question again?
Was there, and I've loved these other responses. It's good.
Don't bother. Don't worry about them. Just tell me what the question
If there
was
was a particular person, a student, an alum, a patient, perhaps in your case, who caused you to pause and realize that this job was perhaps larger and even more meaningful than you initially thought.
That's what I thought it was, but just want to double check. So I did, Lynette, have an unusual window on the world of Iowa by being a doc here at the UI hospitals and clinics. And for a while, for 5 years or so, I was the head of the Division of General Internal Medicine before I focused a lot on cardiology. And we saw a lot of people here from the state of Iowa here at the mothership. And we also went out to see people in rural areas who had a family doc but needed to have a specialist once in a while. And we went out there. And I learned 3 things from Iowans that had a big effect on me throughout my career. One was how foreign the culture of universities is to people who are new to the area. I also was a first-generation college student. And especially a research university, it's a rare organism. There aren't that many in the country, really. What do you figure, 200, something like that? Something like that, out of 150 out of what, 3,000 institutions of higher education. So it's not unusual, remembering that to this day, most people in America have not been through college, to this day. Just a little under half have still not been in college. So the first thing I learned is to remind myself that I was living in a bubble, and that it was important to know that we looked like something unusual. Not negative, but just unusual. The second thing I learned was how much through the medical center, the people of Iowa came to the university in a different way than sending their kids here. They came in fear and desperation and hope that things would get better. And I believe actually that some of them sent their kids to the university for the same reason. They wanted to see them step up to a different way of life. So that was a very, very positive thing. And the last thing is, from the students themselves, not just medical students, but the undergrads and grad students with whom I worked in the engineering lab, I found out how much they themselves were struggling to understand all the mechanisms operational in a research university. And the punchline of all this is that I thought the interaction between Hunter and Mary Sue was very important about the Pew study and the negativity toward higher education, and perhaps it's been lessened to some extent. I think we can still, the faculty can still do a better job of trying to explain exactly what happens behind the curtain. Very, very hard to understand. For people out in the world, regular folks, working people, the concept of tenure, which I think is critical for these universities, sounds about as strange and foreign as you can imagine. And it's really our fault, the presidents and others. We haven't done a good enough job explaining why it is that we do the things we do. And one more quick thing, in research, whether it's medical research or anything else, as Mary Sue mentioned and also implied, there's never a final answer to anything. There's only the next question. And I think the public can get whiplash from some of the things where they, especially in the medical field, you know, for a couple generations we told people you got to stay away from eggs and whole milk. If you have an egg, you'll probably keel over and die the next day. And then all of a sudden we say, you know, that's really okay. It's sugar you should stay away from. And so it's easy to get skeptical, because they're not doing discovery for a living as we are. And so I think we need to do a better job of explaining that it's not a lack of savvy or a lack of doing things right. It's the way it ought to be. that we're never done asking questions. We need to do a better job of that. I learned all that from Iowans.
So I have two quick stories. The first is when I was probably 5 or 6 years into my tenure here, I went over to visit the child care centers because I wanted to know what they were like and what the young children were experiencing. And so I had a lovely meeting with some 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and later I heard from the head of the center that they were so excited because they went home and told their mothers that they had just met the president of the universe. And they knew the word universe, but they couldn't quite get university. And so I thought, you know, boy, I'm president of the universe. I'm big deal. But the event that sort of emblazoned in my mind and that shows the spirit of this place is the day that the old Capitol burned. And it was just a heart-crushing, soul-crushing event, that this was the heart of the campus, and that we thought it would be destroyed. We could not, for many hours we thought it was going to be destroyed, but they saved it, and even better, not only did it get saved, but it got turned in from this sort of crumbling infrastructure building that nobody knew quite what to do with to this gorgeous museum, and to the great credit of the people here that made that happen.
So Sally mentioned the flood, and Mary Sue mentioned the fire. For me, it was the shooting. And it's something you'll never, ever forget. November 1st, 1991. And this was before these tragedies occurred on campuses, with maybe one exception. So it was a day of horror. And Elizabeth and I were in Columbus, Ohio. It was a Friday, and we were going to attend the football game the next day, and we were doing alumni events, and I had a call from my office. There were no cell phones in those days. And in the hotel, I had a call from Ann Hunsinger, my assistant, and she said, "Hunter, I'm under my desk in the office." And I'll never forget that. So that's when I saw some people step up. Ann Rhodes was a brick. Here she was in charge of communications for the university. No one knew what to do. No one knew what to say. Elizabeth and I got on a plane and flew back as fast as we could, but Ann Rhodes had to cope with this. And for the next week, she was amazing. I mean, amazing. Because that's the kind of trauma that no one's prepared for. I don't care how much practice you've had. And frankly, we hadn't had any practice for anything like that because it was unheard of. And I'll never forget the way she stepped up. And so did others in the community. I remember a minister welcomed Chinese students and said, "I know you're all feeling nervous about what's going to happen to you now, but we want you to know that you've got a safe place here, and we're all supporting you." And we had that kind of response from the community and from the university. And I've never been prouder of a group of people under terrible stress than I was then. So that's what I'll never forget about a real crisis, not a made-up crisis, a real crisis, and the way some individuals responded.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hunter, I want to publicly thank you for your role in 1991. I was a faculty member across campus. Of course, we had no idea what was happening. This was before the days of the police carrying any sort of force or anything. And Ann Rhodes did a heck of a job, but so did you. You and Elizabeth came back very quickly and helped us deal with this, and I want to thank you for that, Hunter.
That really segues nicely into the question of having had the kinds of experiences that each of you have had, not all good, obviously, in your leadership, when you think about people entering these roles, what are the most important leadership characteristics that you now think are imperative for institutional presidents? Whoever would like to begin. Sally.
I'd be happy to start because this is what I get to do these days, is to help people seek out these opportunities and live the same kind of opportunity that I had. And I tell them all the time, there's really two things, okay? One is resiliency. You need tremendous resiliency to succeed in these jobs. And the other one's very simple, and that's optimism. I've never seen a successful president who wasn't an eternal optimist and couldn't make lemonade out of lemons or do things that other people thought, how did they get through that and still smile? That sort of thing. It's simple and yet it's very, very complex. And I also tell people who are seeking presidencies in particular that until you sit in the seat, you have no idea, nor can you imagine what it's really like. And I don't know, how do my colleagues feel about that? Is that true?
Everything you say is true, Sally. We're not going to contradict you. Absolutely true. I just add one thing to the two very important attributes that Sally mentioned, and that is the Zen concept of beginner's mind. The Zen concept of beginner's mind goes something like this. In the mind of an expert, there are a few possibilities. In the mind of a beginner, there are many. And I think that it's possible for, especially in your first presidency, to be a little too proud of yourself and a little too sure that you're the president of the universe, or whatever that was. And I think if it's possible to have a beginner's mind, and that is to look at situations and say, you know, I've handled one of these before, or they've done things here, but I'd like to step back and try to take a look at it anew. It's very, very hard to do, especially if you've done leadership in other kinds of positions, which everybody here has done multiple leadership roles. But that ability to deflect the possibility of being too sure of yourself and beginning to have beginner's mind is unbelievably important. So, beginner's mind.
I think one of the things that I've learned over time is that particularly when problems come to the president's office and you're supposed to solve it or make the decision, it's usually because nobody else has been able to solve it. You only get the difficult ones. But what's really important when you're going through that process, I think, is to clearly let the community know what the issue is. Lay out the options. There will be options that you're going to decide among. Then listen to all the people who are going to be affected by your decision. Get their input and listen to them. Make your decision. Think about it. Don't take too long. You need to make the decision. Let people know, but then you need to go to the people who perhaps didn't get the result that they wanted and explain to them why you made the decision. Because one of the things that I've learned over time is that people can accept the fact that you're not going to agree with them, particularly if you've taken the time to listen. And then if you don't go the way they want, let them know why you didn't. And that it's being listened to and being heard that's so important. And then my second thing that I learned is go out and talk to all kinds of people. Don't keep yourself in the bubble. Get out, talk to the community. And I found great joy in doing that and talking to people in Western Iowa who perhaps would never come to the university, but I learned a lot from them. And I hope they learned something from me. And it was all just great fun.
For me, the primary principle is judgment. And that's a broad word, but having good judgment. We make mistakes, but overall, if you can maintain reasonable judgment in selecting the people around you, in making major policy decisions, good judgment, it seems to me, is the one essential you just can't do without. On the other hand, I would also say that communicating well is a terribly important part of the job, and I think Mary Sue and David have talked about that. And it's something that we don't all do naturally well. And some of us don't have a particular skill at communicating, but you need to learn it. And one thing I learned a little late, but eventually, was how to communicate what these universities do. David was saying earlier, most people don't understand a lot of the things we do because they're complex, they're subtle, they're behind the scenes. And I learned one little thing that sounds like a gimmick, but it actually has turned out to be very important. When I would go in front of a congressional committee to talk about the value of research funding from the federal government, at first I just gave them a lot of words, but then someone helped me, and I would take this thing out of my pocket, and I would say, do you all have one of these? And of course they all nodded and said yes. And I said, mine is made by Apple, and it depends on 8 or 9 fundamental technologies, like a central processing unit, and random access memory, and GPS, and smart screen. And look, I'm a professor of Greek, I can't remember the rest. But 9 fundamental technologies. And then I would say, how many of those technologies do you think Apple invented? And they would say maybe 2, 3, 4. And I would say the answer is 0, which you should have guessed. 0. So who did invent those 9 things that enabled this to work? Professors at research universities invented all 9 of them. Apple just leased the technology from the universities. And Steve Jobs was a very creative guy and wonderful at design, but he was not a scientist. He didn't develop any of those things. And then you point out that all of the funding to support that research was provided by the federal government. You know, Americans think the federal government just wastes money. Well, that's a phenomenal return on investment. The money that goes into that research that produces those 9 things that then create this has returned thousands of times over. And most people in America don't know any of what I just said. They don't know any of it. And it's important that we do a good job of communicating that. And so I think that's another very important part of what we have to do.
And I just want to add one thing onto the research. It's a very important point that Hunter was making. And that is, you look back at what happened in Apple, and you go way back to the earlier discoveries that eventually, by some circuitous path, led to that. And most of us, I certainly could never have predicted which of those basic science things in physics, for example, might eventually have led to a smartphone, which means that you have to have confidence in investigator-initiated, peer-reviewed research. Even if it seems odd, trivial, funny, strange, you never know where it's going to lead. You never know where it's going to lead. And I think that was a great example you gave of a cell phone. Most of those things were basic physics discoveries, with the exception of a couple, and I think it would have been pretty hard to predict.
In fact, every year we give the Golden Goose Awards in Washington, D.C. The AAAS and AAU and APLU get together and do these awards. And it's astonishing how many times the fundamental research that nobody knew what it was for and why, it was just curiosity driven, has created whole industries. And so, and we in this country have been really good at that. And I think the fact that we are willing to fund curiosity-driven research has created an enormous payback in the economy for us.
And if I may, I think there are a couple of corollaries to this conversation in the role of the presidency. I think one, as we're making decisions, the more diverse the team is that's involved in it, the more rich or richer the options will be, and the better discussion, and the better the consideration. And so if we tend to just always surround ourselves with the same people for different types of problems, that becomes a problem in its own right. And the second piece is that I think, my guess is all my colleagues spend a lot of time not on just the decision, but the second derivative of the decision, which is it's often it begets something else. And you've got to think through not just solving this problem, but are you creating a precedent, or are you creating a chain reaction of other activities, and anticipate the longer term consequences? Because we're soon going to celebrate our 175th anniversary. We're going to be around for another 175 years if we take the appropriate steps along the way. And you can never predict them perfectly.
Thank you.
This point about diversity, Mary Sue will have to remind me, was it Scott Page at Michigan? Professor Scott Page, who was here, I think, before he was at Michigan. It's a very important thing that Bruce talked about, diverse teams and diversity. A lot of people hear university presidents and faculty talking about diversity. They roll their eyes and think, more political correctness. But this Professor Scott Page, who was at Iowa, ended up at Michigan. You know, some people take a wrong turn, it happens. He's published 2 fabulous books about this, one called The Difference, and a more recent one called something like The Diversity Bonus or something like that. And it's just loaded with data that shows that diverse teams do better work. So it's a really good point.
Well, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's not only the right thing to do, it's actually the smarter thing to do for all sorts of reasons. In fact, when we get into MLK in January, we'll be talking about that. MLK was not only the right thing for our society. I think the more inclusive we are, and the more diverse we are, and the more collaborative we are, and frankly, the more we argue professionally, the better our decisions are.
You asked different questions. My famous story is when Bernadine Healy became head of the NIH, first woman ever, and until her time at the NIH, the only model for heart disease was the white male, 45 years old. And guess what? When she became, and they were the only ones in clinical trials, and when she became head of NIH, she said, no. Clinical trials have to include women, men, ethnic groups, racial groups, and they got a much richer picture of what happens, and to everybody's benefit, because men have wives, they have sisters, they have mothers, different ethnic groups have different outcomes. I mean, it's always better, because it's better for everybody, not just for the group that's affected and included.
Thank you. And as I think about concluding our time together, I'd like to just put a point on that. One of the wonderful new homecoming traditions that Bruce and Mary Harreld have brought to our university, that Mary Harreld brought to our university, and that Bruce was smart enough to follow up on, is
So
something
was
I would invite all of you to recognize, which is the beautiful new flags representing all of the nations of the students at the University of Iowa on the Iowa Memorial Union Bridge. So during the week of homecoming and then during the week of commencement in May, we have all of these beautiful, beautiful flags flying, and I think it's really a magnificent reflection of the diversity of this campus, the people that we bring to this campus who want to have public higher education from a major university in the world, and we are lucky enough to be associated with the University of Iowa that helps provide that. Yay, Mary. I want to thank each of you for coming back. This is just a remarkable experience to be able to have you all back and together and in conversation. We're grateful for the opportunity to have you yesterday for the unveiling of the new portraits. I encourage everyone to see those, and we look forward to other activities. Remember that the homecoming parade is tonight, so if any of you are planning to be at that. And I would also remind everyone that we also have at 3 o'clock this afternoon right here on this stage the awarding of the university's Distinguished Alumni Awards.
Lynette, we wouldn't be here without Sandy.
That's
Sandy,
right.
the first time I met him, started talking about finishing these portraits. I contacted a few, if not all of the folks here who haven't had their portraits done, and they all said, no way, not me. And it's the 2 Iowan. I reported back to Sandy that isn't going to work that way, and so then he and I wrote a letter, and with his signature, and they all decided to do it. They complained the whole time. And here they are, and we're so glad you did so, and we're so honored to have you here. Thank you, Sandy. Thanks to all of you.
Good. Thank you all for coming, and happy homecoming.